Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, costume designer Nat Turner, joins us to talk about their work on the Tetris movie. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Nat. Hi, Nat. Thanks for joining me today.
No problem.
I think we finally got through that little intro bit of me just tripping over the pronunciation of your name. So apologies for that.
That's all good. That's all good.
So we're here today to talk about Tetris, which came out last week on Apple TV Plus. I really enjoyed it. I didn't know that there was so much to it, to just getting the rights to a video game and the story behind it, which is crazy to think as well now when you think about Tetris as a game and just how popular it is. And I wouldn't be surprised if people still play it, even the kids at school, if they'll have those websites that are unblocked to play during lessons rather than listen to the teacher. I'm pretty certain we did that as well.
I'll have to ask my daughter about that. She won't tell me the truth too, no doubt, anyway, so.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully I haven't just grassed her up by mistake.
Don't worry, I'm making notes.
So how have you found the whole reception to the film?
Yeah, I mean, it's I was saying to you earlier, it's kind of like, it's weird because it's such a long time ago now that you can never really look, I don't think anyway, you can really look at work that you've done sort of objectively. It's really complicated to sort of view it in the same way that other people view it, because you're just kind of like, oh, remember that costume was a real pain, or that was that day when it didn't stop raining, or all those sorts of memories come up, rather than I'm really engrossed in this film and I can't stop thinking about what's happening with the characters. I'm constantly sort of analyzing all the other information that's around it rather than what they're actually talking about. I sort of try to, sometimes I watch like films with the sound down as well, just to try and, I don't know, to sort of decode what everybody else's work that they'd put in, because obviously the story is the most important part, but there's a whole lot of other information that the other departments are trying to sort of impart through their own crafts. But yeah, I think the reception's been pretty good, I think, generally. Yeah, I mean, lots of most of the people that I know, and people who worked in my department on the film, they were really, really happy with it. They thought it was sort of zipped along, was pretty awesome and stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty happy. I can only sort of be happy with how other people view it, if you see what I mean, rather than how I view it. That's the burden, I suppose, of being an HOD, because you're too close to it.
I think, yeah, you're right in terms of you basically analyze all of it, but then on top of that, because you're constantly looking at all your designs and whatnot in the film, but then I guess if you have somebody, I guess, off the street that said, "Oh, I saw Tetris. Oh my gosh, did you see this outfit? Did you see that costume?" Then I guess that sort of unburdens you as well, and I guess kind of like builds you up a bit more as well to be like, "Yeah, we made it look good."
Yeah, I mean, it's nice when people say that your work's good or whatever, but to some degree, with me anyway, I don't know if other people feel this way, but I kind of don't really ever believe anyone. I don't know if that's part of like imposter syndrome or something, but I'm always kind of like, well, they're just saying that, or it's always about whether it's good enough for me, if you know what I mean, rather than if it's good enough for anybody else. And also, I'm also thinking about like a lot of my contemporaries and other costume designers that I know, and I'm sort of more concerned about how they see it really than anybody else. But yeah, it's always nice for people to to say that they thought it was good or whatever. That's I'll always take that. It's very kind of people to say things like that. I always feel like nothing's really good enough, and I suppose that's why you keep doing it, because it can be quite a painful process sometimes, and it can be quite not traumatic, but it can be impacts on your life a lot, this industry. To give up what you have to give up with your family life or whatever, you have to put everything into it, and that has a cost to your sort of family life, and keep on doing more films because you think, well, this time I'll really nail it. But then when you get to the end of that film, you still are kind of like, well, that bit kind of wasn't how I thought it would turn out, or this bit wasn't. This bit was great, but that bit wasn't so great. You know, well, maybe the next one, that will be the one that's perfect, you know, because you're always sort of striving for that, but you're never really going to arrive there, I don't think. Maybe you will. Maybe that's when you get an Oscar. I don't know. We'll find. Hopefully, we'll find out.
We'll bookmark this for next year. So I guess we could always go back. How did the project come about, and what was it that wanted you to take the challenge on?
This whole film was shot during the first major lockdown, well, just after it just lifted, actually. So I've been working on this film with Reggie Yates called Pirates, which was great, and I really loved the experience. And so we'd got shut down in like March, when everything shut down, and we had that summer where nobody did anything and nobody went to work, and so we didn't do anything for that whole summer. And then I came back to finish Reggie's film in September, and we were like one of the first films to come back. And we only had I think we only had like 2 weeks left to shoot, but it was really, really complicated because there was no, the whole way in which we dealt with the coronavirus within films was not like a thing yet. Like nobody had any clue how to deal with it, really. I think Jurassic World was the only film that had gone back apart from us. So we were just literally got through that. And I was like, oh, well, there probably won't be any work for ages, because it didn't really seem like anything was really continuing, because obviously the pandemic was in full swing and everybody was really concerned, So, but then I got my agent phoned me and said, oh, John S. Baird has phoned about this film about Tetris. And I'd worked with John previously on Babylon, which was this TV series that Danny Boyle been sort of executive producer on and stuff. And it had been quite a while ago, so I was kind of quite surprised, and I was really, really happy that John had remembered me, to be fair. And I was a bit like, saying to my agent, I was like, have they got the right? Are you sure they asked for me and then not somebody else? Because I'm not. It seems a bit weird, to sort of out of the blue, that it's apart from obviously working with John before. And she was like, no, they do. They want to. John wants to Zoom you. So we did, and we still got on, and he wanted me to do it, and I was over the moon. Obviously, like everybody, I was a bit like, so how are you making a film about Tetris? I mean, how does that work? What do you mean it's a film about Tetris? I don't understand. So he sort of gave me the whole pitch and stuff, and obviously sent me the script. And Noah Pink, who wrote the script, I thought he'd written such a great script, because it sort of it had made a lot of quite complicated legal wrangles like quite easy to understand, like I suppose in the same way that The Big Short did and stuff, that it sort of communicates these quite dry subjects, I suppose, in a way in which you're kind of interested in, and it's intriguing. And then obviously it's got lots of, it played out, I suppose, the script I thought was amazing, and it sort of played out like something that kind of more like a chase movie almost. It was, because he's constantly going from, going to Japan and then going to America and then to Moscow, and he's sort of zipping across the world all over the place, and it sort of played out like more like that kind of thing to me. And I just thought it was really well written, and then I sort of started reading around it, and there's a book by Dan Ackerman called The Tetris Effect, which sort of gives you the full truth, as it were, about what went on. And a lot of the stuff in the script is absolutely true, and there's some things that aren't in the film that were equally kind of shocking and stuff and interesting. But you can't, there's only so much you can put into one film, I suppose. But I thoroughly recommend that book to anyone who thought the film was interesting, because the book goes in even more detail, which is good for me. I mean, I'm always looking for little hooks and other bits to hook character sort of things onto, and so I was hoping that there might be more information about Henk in there and Alexei and stuff, and just little bits and pieces that you can pick up through all the different bits of research, I suppose. But yeah, that's how it came to me, basically, that, you know, John wanted me to do it, and I was, you know, like I said, I'm really super happy to work with him, because he'd been really lovely to work with when I'd worked with him previously, and he was on this as well, which was great.
I think you're right in terms of the film plays like a political thriller in terms of you're in that chase, and they only have a certain sort of, because they put a week, they put it later on in the film, Microsoft have a week to pay that 1 million, and then that creates a really good tension as like a ticking time bomb of like, oh my gosh, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? And then there's so much to it as well in terms of, like, it's not just about Tetris, but also all these other firms and these people involved in it, and the sort of, lack of a better term, backstabbing that happens just to keep hold of that power.
Yeah, I mean, that the whole sort of business world is kind of mind blowing to me, and the way in which people do stab each other in the back, and because, you know, we work in the beautiful utopia that is film, and it doesn't, in my experience anyway, it doesn't really come out that way. You know, we work in teams, and it's all about, you know, trying to make the best thing possible between all of us, whereas it seems like a lot of business related things seem to be like, well, I'm out for myself, and you know, what can I make and what can I get? So, but yeah, which is why I love Succession so much as well, because that's the same kind of thing. I just can't quite get my head around how awful those people are, because I don't know anybody like that. You know, there's some pretty awful characters in Tetris as well, you know.
Especially as well that they're based on real life people and real life events, where you just think, wow, I can't believe something that sort of happened, and no one
Yeah,
really.
well, you know, I think that someone should really make like a sort of some kind of either TV show or film or something about Robert Maxwell's life, because his life is really crazy. You know, so I sort of read around him a little bit and listened to some podcasts about his life, and it's just, you know, it's not just the stuff in his later life. There's stuff in his earlier life, which is, you're just kind of like, what? And you know, that he came from where, and you know, there's all this spy stuff in his background and stuff as well. So he's a really interesting character as well, which none of that stuff really gets touched on, particularly in this film, but everybody knows what a kind of ogre, I suppose, Robert Maxwell was, and obviously, you know, stealing the pensions and all the rest of it. He's quite the character. He is quite the character.
Yeah, there's so much about him as well. Just like, even as you said, the spy stuff. But just, yeah, even that feels like a work of fiction when you read the sort of things that he has done and what he was doing.
Absolutely.
Because this is a period film, and
Yeah.
with a film like this, like, where do you begin with your research? And because you just don't jump in time periods, you also don't jump a lot between different cultures. So you have Russia during the Soviet Union time, you have America in that sort of 80s groove, and then you also have Japan as well.
I mean, yeah, there was a lot to there was a lot to research, and obviously there's all the whole military aspect as well, because that's the thing all on its own, which is like, nobody wants to get military stuff wrong, because there's a million military anoraks on the internet who'll go, the wrong epaulette on this person or whatever, or that color is wrong, is incorrect for the KGB. For the Russian stuff, I watched sort of as much Russian TV as I could on YouTube, because there's quite a lot of weirdly 1980s Russian TV on YouTube. And there's also a film called Little Vera that I watched as well, which is it was quite a fated Russian film of that, around that time, sort of 1980s. And I've got a lot of books, lots and lots of books, and I've done quite a lot of 1980s projects in the past. So I've built up a fair bit of 1980s photography research over the years, like, you know, like Wonder Woman 1984 that Lindy Hemming designed. I was like assistant designer on that as well. So, you know, that was fairly recent when we were doing the film anyway. So there was a little bit of crossover there as well, because we had a little bit of Russian Soviet military in that. But I specifically, with the military stuff, I had to buy a few military books. to make sure. But also the military stuff is quite complicated because a lot of the, especially with the KGB the KGB stuff, because a lot of these books kind of say yes, and they wore this style of uniform, and the color of their epaulets was blue, and the da da da, and then right at the end of the sentence they go, they say yes, and all this is definite, and then they go, except maybe it wasn't, because there was not that much information, because it was the Soviet Union at the time, and so everything was very secret. So you kind of, I'm going through all of that stuff, and Sean, my supervisor as well, she likes a bit of military as well. So we were sort of talking a lot about that, and we've got there's various different military, not forces, I can't think what the word is now, branches in the films. So there's like communications. So when you see the communications room, they all have like black epaulets and stuff, because that's what the communication color is. And the KGB have got this sort of bright blue color, which we see in regimental, what they called, the regimental presidential guard, I think it was, yeah. So they're all actually KGB, so that's this bright blue color. And we see that also on the guy who's in Gorbachev's chamber, and then the general army is red, so there's a lot of that when we're doing, the street scene stuff. And then there's border guards as well, so that's green. I don't know why I started talking about military so much, but sorry about that. You were talking about research.
It's okay.
And yeah, so that was kind of like the Russian side of it. And then with the American stuff, I mean, that's obviously reasonably easy to get into, because I've got a fair bit of magazines. So with Taran, with Henk's stuff, we were looking at kind of like Armani of the period, and sort of looking at sort of Vogue Homme type research for him to make his silhouette significantly different from the rest of them, because obviously there's a lot of guys wearing suits in this, so there's quite a lot of suit differentiation, which I suppose the sort of casual viewer wouldn't necessarily pick up. But there's that sort of Italian, large-shouldered American, kind of Italian American, I suppose, anyway, sort of look to Hank's silhouette, and also all of his suits, because he's coming from Tokyo, so some of his suits actually are Armani, but the main one that he wears, which is a single-breasted one we made because we needed duplicates of it for action and stuff like that, and stunt doubles. Oh, and actually we made a sports jacket for him as well, but all of the materials, all the cloths of his suits needed to be lightweight, because he's coming from Tokyo, which generally is a warmer place, and I just wanted him to look ill prepared, I suppose, to be going into the Soviet Union in winter. So like obviously everybody else is bundled up with wool and lots of layers and stuff, and he's sort of arriving there with just his suit, because he's so possessed, on his mission to get this game. And then obviously the second time he comes back, he's got an overcoat, because he learned from the first time that he went there that was a really stupid thing to go with no coat to Moscow, when he couldn't buy a coat, because again, the Soviet Union was what it was. It was hard to get sort of normal day-to-day things that you'd imagine you could get anywhere. Just go and buy a coat. It's like, well, what if there wouldn't be any? What if there are no winter coats left because everybody bought them all these sort of considerations. And also, yeah, so getting back to your question about the research, there was also this really great, for the CES trade show, there was this amazing YouTube video that some guy had taken on his camcorder of the exact like 1988 CES trade show. And so I found that, and that was invaluable as well, really, because it was interesting to see all the different types of people. So you don't really see it so much in the film, but we had like, each stall had a different representative, and we had little mascots, and, sort of some guys in the arcade. So they all had sort of different branded. So some of them had kind of, I can't even, it wasn't Activision, because obviously we weren't allowed to use stuff like that, but like it was sort of Activision-esque t-shirts and stuff in the arcade part, and some sort of showgirls, which you do see, and actually they got that 8-bit treatment, so that was quite nice, because they were quite happy with those costumes. They look quite funny. But yeah, this CES trade show camcorder footage was absolutely hilarious, because it's obviously this like single kind of, it must be this single geeky guy who'd gone round, and he was kind of like zooming in on all of the new products and stuff. And although he didn't really sort of focus on the Nintendo stand too much, which was annoying, because I really wanted to have a look at that one. But he was sort of looking at there's all kinds of like everything there, like like in the film where you've got the sort of Ferrari Testarossa or whatever it is in the middle of it, and there was like music stands and everything, and he'd be zooming in on these guitars and stuff. And then but what was more disturbing was that you'd always zoom in on the sort of these women who were there to sort of obviously tempt the people into the stalls, and he'd like be zooming in on their bums and stuff, and you'd be like, this is a really inappropriate video to put on YouTube. Particularly, there was lots of good research in it aside from him perving out over women's bums.
I'm kind of curious to know that if like this guy's done this like camcorder footage, I wonder if he ever thought that in 20 years, 30 years time, that somebody would take it, upload it, and then just like this was supposed to be his own sort of thing, and it was just like some random person has like purchased it from a thrift shop or a charity shop and have just been like, oh, and they either haven't gone through all of it or just uploaded it, and then just for the sake of just being like, look how it was back in those times.
Yeah, but it's really eye-opening, like I said, because I hadn't even considered that sort of that angle of, because I was kind of, I suppose, from some of the photos that I'd seen, I was aware that there were women on the fronts of the stands and stuff like that to sort of show people. And I suppose that was that used to be anyway one of those things that always happened, especially like at car shows and stuff. They'd always have like women at car shows and stuff, so wouldn't they, like scantily clad? But I never really sort of thought of it at a sort of computer computer trade show. It was very much there, and I wouldn't have. And we did put some of those sort of women characters into the trade show, which I wouldn't have done if I hadn't seen that video, because it didn't even occur to me, to be honest.
I think as well, just going back to your point about the military outfits, in terms of just how the KGB were basically a very shadowy government, should we say, with how they operated, but also the idea of the uniforms, because it was a sort of loose lips sink ship sort of society where somebody, if you said something to your neighbor, that they might tell the government, or you might be talking to the wrong, you might voice a disgruntlement that you have with the government with someone, and then they could, you're arrested and sent away to Gulag for 20 years. What I think is quite interesting in when you're saying about your research is the secrecy still surrounding what they're wearing and what they're having, even though communism and KGB collapsed over 30 years ago, and how we still don't have that information about how different sectors, what they wore and how they sort of operated as well.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, like my wife, also, I didn't mention this as well previously in terms of my research. My wife is Slovakian, which obviously isn't Russian, but was, when she was growing up, she grew up under kind of Soviet authority, I guess, because it was, they were part of the Soviet Union at that, before the Velvet Revolution and stuff. And she actually, when you were saying about people, your neighbors listening into you and stuff, which is in Tetris the film as well. She personally, her dad he used to do a lot of potholing, and he discovered a lot of caves and stuff in Slovakia, and he went traveling around to Italy and stuff to go potholing with these other friends that he'd made. And because he was known to have friends outside of Slovakia, they were under surveillance for a time, and my wife, she knows that they were recording all of their conversations through the walls and all this stuff, and that was literally just for a guy who wanted to go potholing in Italy, let alone anything more serious, So I think it was definitely quite a strange time to live through.
My mum grew up behind the Iron Curtain as well, and then when her dad died, she was on the phone in England to Poland to her mum, and they were discussing what to do with the funeral. And during I'll need to just double check this when I see her later, but apparently the person listening to their call actually suggested to them what to do. And it's like,
Really?
I'll
Wow.
need to double check that. I will. I'll let you know. But yeah, you kind of think like, wow, that's how crazy that sort of time was, and
Yeah.
how people were focusing on all of those sort of aspects around then. But also to go to your point about the clothing outside of the USSR. So, for example, like Hank's outfits, he's you create such a design that he sticks out like a sore thumb. So there's moments when he'll go. I think it was when he goes to Alexi's apartment and they go out. He's wearing like a Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah.
And it's quite a vibrant yellow as well from memory. And even that's like it's just quite a funny image to see because everybody's in sort of grey, all wrapped up, and then you just see this sort of effectively outsider coming in, being like, all bubbly and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I did, we haven't really sort of gone into the sort of color schemes and stuff, everything yet, but yeah, I really wanted him to stick out, specifically in Russia. I mean, I would have actually made him stick out slightly more. I don't think John wanted him to be fine line, I suppose, between sticking out and looking foolish, I suppose. And I think it's very clear that they didn't want him to ever appear foolish. Although I did manage to get the cowboy boots in because I thought that would be kind of funny when he loses his trousers and he has to walk back into the hotel with just his bare legs and his tube socks and his cowboy boots on. I just thought that was a funny image, and that sort of that somehow kind of got through the whole process, and the cowboy boots sort of remained from the very first conversation that I'd had with John and Taryn at the same time. It's funny because it's like a lot of the time I want things to look correct to period, but I also don't necessarily want things to look. I don't want him to look too polished or too perfect. I want him to look like a man who's really trying to look cool, but he's not really cool. Because I think the real Hank was definitely like that. I think in later life, you look at the real Hank now, and you're like, wow, he's such a cool kind of surfer guy and all this stuff. And he does actually have all of that in his past. Like before he went to Tokyo and stuff, he lived in Hawaii, and he was a bit of a dropout. His real kind of story. He was like he seemed to be incredibly intelligent, and he'd do all these courses, but then when he'd get to the end of the computing course or whatever, and they'd be like, right, so you need to do this test to get your final grade, and he'd be like, no, I don't need to do that. I've learned what I need to do now, and I'll see you later. And I can't think which one it was, but I think it was when he was at college in New York. He just walked out before he finished his final examination, because he was like, well, I've learned everything I need to do here now. I don't need the piece of paper. See you later. And that's kind of he's got an arrogance to him for sure. But yeah, the things that I wanted, like that, there's that really, so things that aren't really correct, aren't things that don't make him look cool, are obviously his ties, which are quite sort of overt in not particularly nice ways. And also that peachy shirt that he wears, which I'm really kind of happy with, because it's just off enough. It's quite period. Like we made all of his shirts, and we also, not all of his shirts, most of his shirts we made. And like I said, we made that grey suit that he wears the majority of the time. And sort of the details on those are quite very correct, I'd say. The shape it's almost like a slight spear point in the collar of the peachy shirt, and there's another couple of the colors that we did of it which had the same collar shape, and it's quite specific to like late 80s shirts, and you can't really buy it now either, which is why we had to make them. But and on his suit, the details of his lapel, he's got quite a wide lapel, and the notch is dropped a bit, which again is sort of correct in that time. It's sort of throughout. I can talk about suit details forever, but it's like, they sort of notches go up and down, and then sometimes they go peak, and there's various sort of points throughout history where they change and are a certain thing, and the fact that that notch is slightly lower than it should be really kind of says late 80s kind of on the nose. And he's got pleats in his trousers as well, which pretty much the rest, everybody else I don't think doesn't have, no one else has a pleat in their trouser at all, and a sort of fuller leg. Everyone else is still in kind of more like in the earlier 80s, you'd have more like a flat front, and like Kevin Maxwell, and well, both the Maxwells, in fact, Robert and Kevin Maxwell both have a flat fronted trouser. I think. Oh, actually, no, we did. Maybe we did put a pleat in Robert's. I can't remember now, but he might have a pleat in there just to give him a bit more room in his leg, because obviously he was wearing a lot of fat padding to pad his legs out, so he might have needed that pleat just to give a bit more room in his legs.
There was another thing that I wanted to pull a thread on, but I will ask that after the next, because it was about the costume authenticity and
Oh,
be kind of, I'm kind of jumping here a little bit, but it was just because as a period film, you already mentioned that you wanted to make them as accurate as you want
yeah.
during that time. But do you ever think as well, when you look as a costume designer, you're looking at some of these clothes and you kind of think, wow, that just looks slightly awful. Did you ever just want to sort of tweak that design just a little bit so that you're like, actually, that makes it a little bit cooler, or you can add your own little signature touch to it?
No, I think what I'm mostly looking for is something that's awful. That something that's not, something that we're not really used to seeing today. That's what I'm generally looking for. I want to find those bits that aren't part of modern day clothing experience, if you like. Like I think you can make an argument that the suits that Henk wears, like nobody's wearing suits like that right now. And I think it's good that they aren't. But I also think it's good that he is wearing it in this film because it's correct to that time. And I don't know, I want to show people things that they haven't necessarily seen, maybe, except if they're watching, a bang on period, a film from 1988 or something. I'm looking for those little touches that will make it true to that time, but also true to the character, obviously, as well. Because like I was saying about his suits previously, it's like, I wanted his suits to be lightweight because he's coming from Tokyo and stuff. And in theory, even though some of those suits are Armani, it's like he probably would have a tailor in Tokyo who was making his suits at that time. He'd not necessarily be buying them off the peg. So all that sort of information, any information that I can put in to show the history of the character and his ties as well, because there's a lot of his ties, like we were saying, they're quite bright and sort of these abstract patterns. They felt quite American to me. So, and because he's like a mix of a lot of different, because his mum was Indonesian and his dad was Dutch, and I think anything that I can know about him that I can try and use to help visually help that come across, I'll try and use. So I'm kind of looking for anything odd, I suppose. That's what I'm trying to do. And I don't think on this I really made anything, seek to make anything cooler maybe than it was. I mean, obviously it is the type of film that it is, so there is that kind of spy element and stuff, so it is pushed. I'm not saying that it's all absolutely, because real KGB operatives in that time, there's lots of interesting conversations I even had about that, to be fair, that it was kind of like, the KGB operatives who operated in overseas would have all the nicest clothes and they wouldn't look like poor they wouldn't look like poor people who'd come from Russia, you know what I mean, obviously, because they need to fit in the environment that they're in, but they would have all the nicest clothes from all the nicest tailors, because they'd be they were being sponsored by the state to fit in, so they'd make use of, I suppose, that. And also they'd make use of the fact that they could get all the best stuff and the best clothes and look the nicest watches and stuff, because they had to. But then there's this sort of switch, I think, where they almost begin to start buying into that, even, so it's like, I was kind of using that conversations that I've had with various people in Valentin's costume, because and obviously because his character is out for himself as well. He's not out for, he's not kind of like he's not for his country like Belikov is. Belikov wants to make the best deal for his country because he is like a true communist, But Valentin is very much seeing that, communism is about to fail, and he's like, right, what can I get out of this? So the way that I dressed him, was more Western in terms of, the overcoat he's wearing with a velvet collar and stuff. I liked seeing that difference in him and just making him quite slick. And I suppose a bit James Bondy in a way, because it kind of goes to those places. So it's the reality of what you can find, the information you can find out, plus the type of film that you think that you're making to produce a costume.
With somebody like Valentine as well, or even people outside of Russia when they're sort of buying into that capitalistic mindset rather than communism. And I think the best example of that is, you mentioned it earlier, when Hank has his jeans stolen and they say thank you for the Levi's, and then the fact is that they're stealing a pair of jeans off him, and it's like that sort of image and idea as well. It's like you can kind of see that they are out for themselves and they're sort of turning their back on what the fundamentals of the government is.
Yeah, and with that jeans theft, as it were, as well, we were kind of we made sure that we didn't use jeans on anybody, any characters. We didn't use jeans on. The only jeans that we used was when we went to the party, sort of with the sort of more, in inverted commas, forward-thinking people. When Hank goes to the party with Alexei, and there's kind of more kind of revolutionary type people and stuff there. So they were wearing jeans, but none of them were like Wrangler or Levi or any of that sort of stuff. They were kind of like cheap versions of those, and snow washes and stuff like that, because you couldn't get that American product in Russia without really trying. And I think if you were wearing them around, then you were really making a political statement by wearing them, especially if you're a Russian person.
Yeah, exactly. And just interesting to sort of, even something so simple as jeans can create such a big stern hoo-ha with people.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess that is the times that it was. I mean, all I can do is research. I can't, obviously, I have no first-hand experience of it, apart from there's a few conversations that I've had with my wife about how things were and how difficult it was getting certain things in Slovakia. But as we know, as I was saying, that's not direct. It's just sort of under the same kind of regime, but it's not exactly the same. But it's good to get some kind of social view of what it was like living under those in that environment.
Yeah, exactly. And just like crazy to think of those times. It just sort of, because we started talking about color palettes a little bit earlier, and this kind of ties in with another one of my questions, is the collaboration process with other departments. I saw an interview on YouTube where you talked about your collaboration with Daniel Taylor, the production designer, where you kind of spoke about color palettes between locations, and how you kind of wanted to how the color palettes at those locations were kind of had to be quite distinct to show how different each area was, so that, and I guess not just audience members can differentiate where they are, but also it's the sort of storytelling elements of just what people's lives are like as well, and how this world is lived in.
Yeah.
Like, how do these conversations, decisions affect your creative and design process? Do you suggest color palettes to Dan, for example, or is it a case that he's kind of the front runner with these ideas, and then you build you kind of design the costumes and looks around it?
Traditionally, like, production designers come on a bit before costume designers do. So Dan had been working on it prior to me becoming involved with the project, and so he had got like quite a wealth of research that he'd already built up before I started. But like, it was kind of nice because pretty much, I think it was like the first conversation that we had together, and we started talking about color palettes, etc. And as you're saying, sort of differentiating between all the different countries, just to again try and help the viewer in knowing where we are at whatever point, because the film does hop around so much from continent to continent that you're kind of, it could be confusing if you didn't try to give them a sort of a map, I suppose, to work with, to go, well, I know that this is, this colorway is associated with Russia, or this way is America, and just all those things. Anything you can do to help, really. That's generally what I'd say our job is like anything I do to help the actor, to help the director, help the story. That's what you're doing, is just trying to help all the time. And so yeah, when we first started talking about the colors, we both were pretty much on the same page straight from the first meeting, really. And then I don't know, we did talk about stuff when we were talking about things as we were going along, like colors of cars and the color of the taxi and Alexi's car and all these things. But there's some parts that you can't really control, because some of it you can control it as much as you can, but there's certain parts when whatever, you get into continuity from a day or something, and so you can't always have the perfect match, I suppose, between like an environment and a costume, especially with us where we're traveling across continents and stuff sort of constantly. But you can try. And also when Alwyn Kukla, who was the DOP as well, he came when I got up to Scotland, because I started pre-prep in London and then went up to Scotland after that. And that was the first time I met him, was not far out from shooting, but we'd sort of been talking, we were talking a lot about sort of differences that we'd noticed in photographs that we'd been looking at. So, a lot of the Russian photographs I'd been looking at. I mean, it's interesting actually, because it is, when you were asking earlier about, did we sort of stylize things or try and make things better than they were in the 80s? I suppose yes, actually. I wasn't entirely truthful, because it's like the Russian, for instance, the Russian people, they don't necessarily look quite as bedraggled as maybe they're portrayed in the film, because with the research I was doing, lots of the research I looked at, and to be fair, you probably, if I put a picture from Moscow in 1988 next to a picture from certain parts of England in 1988, you probably wouldn't really be able to see that much difference, actually, because the fashion side of it is not that pushed. We did push it backwards a little, I suppose, in terms of period, and also, obviously the color palette of it is pushed as well, because even though Russia seems like a grey place in the 1980s, and it probably was to some degree, it's not as extreme as the sort of case made in the film. So because the film is a film, and reality is reality. So yeah, the differences me and Alwyn were looking at was, I'd sort of noticed that a lot of the Russian photographs I was looking at were, the colors were more subdued, but there was always these really quite bright pops of red, which I thought was kind of funny, because obviously that's the communist color of the day and the color of the Russian flag. So I was talking to Alvin about that, and he was kind of like, yeah, that's a really interesting detail. And we got a bit of that in there with Alexi's kids. Have got kind of have this pioneers uniform, which features a red scarf, and there's also kind of a little jacket underneath their clothes, which you don't really get to see. There was a scene that got cut, I think, where you did see this jacket, but there's sort of, it's kind of like the scouts for communists, essentially, is the best way of describing it. But if you were quite nationalistic and you wanted to just display that, then you could wear that to school, etc. And so I thought that was kind of like an interesting way of Alexei trying to draw attention away from the fact that he was maybe less wanting to be governed by the state than having ideas of his own and stuff, that he was kind of diverting that attention away from himself by his kids kind of wearing sort of a slightly nationalistic item of clothing. And also, as I was saying previously, the sort of the red pop that it gives quite nicely.
It's interesting to hear when you have that collaboration with different departments, and how, because each person's start date is different, you're kind of at different processes of design, or stages of design, should I say, and where you're sort of going from there. You're right in terms of, obviously, like with films, Russia will be made to look quite more dreary and sad and grey and whatnot. But if you actually look at sort of like Moscow, where they have, I'm not sure what it is, but they have those sort of multicolored buildings.
Sure.
I don't know if it's their I'm not sure what it is. I'm sure somebody will be screaming at me saying it's this, it's this.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I just think it's, again, I guess you just need to sort of show that juxtaposition of different places and how different times, but I guess as well in terms of how weather will affect the look of things. So, if it's quite cold, dreary, and snowy, it will make things look a lot sort of sadder, shall we say?
Yeah, and I mean, all of this was shot in Glasgow. Like the entire film was shot in Glasgow. So, Dan Taylor, who's a production designer, really, did such an amazing job because again, there's a few scenes that were cut that were some exteriors of Hank's kids' school, which we did in like February in Glasgow with all these poor children and their mums in very summery looking clothing. But you wouldn't have known. You really wouldn't have known that it was shot in Glasgow. It was really quite amazing. And so yeah, I mean, making things look sad wasn't particularly hard, should we say, in Glasgow, because obviously there's a lot of really beautiful brutalist buildings of which I'm a massive fan of, to be fair, and Aberdeen as well, which also had some fantastic buildings like the Ellel buildings in Aberdeen, and so yeah, I suppose Dan's biggest, well, many of Dan's challenges were the bits that weren't like Tokyo and Las Vegas. And so obviously Las Vegas wasn't so tricky because that's an interior, so we could kind of amp that up with lots of color and stuff, and just go a bit mad with it. The stuff the Tokyo stuff was interesting because it's like all of the Tokyo stuff I think now is pretty much just all in Hank's apartment and bulletproof software. So all you see really is interiors. And I suppose in terms of the look and feel of Tokyo, I was thinking it was lighter and brighter, if you know what I mean. But whereas obviously a lot of that is governed by in sort of slightly dingy interior lights, and a lot of the stuff in Hank's apartment is at night time as well because it's when they've got home from work or he's got home from a really late, getting in on a red eye flight and all that sort of thing. So I suppose it didn't quite, the Tokyo thing didn't quite translate as I thought it would, mainly because of the lighting states and stuff, and the fact that we never saw outside, we just saw the interiors. So my kind of bright, breezy version of Tokyo didn't really. It was still quite oppressive. It felt quite oppressive in those interior scenes still, which is entirely fine because there is a feeling of oppression through the film anyway, and obviously the pressure that Hank's under. So that's absolutely right. But I suppose in terms of what you're talking about working with other departments, that was sort of more surprising to me that it kind of wasn't quite how I had thought it would be. And also I haven't talked about working with Jan Saul, the makeup and hair designer as well, and because obviously that's massively integral. And if anything, our departments are kind of intrinsically linked through, sort of a common purpose, which is, trying to make each character as sort of singular and sort of striking as they can be. So obviously with Jan, I was constantly in conversations with Jan about all of the various different characters, and I because generally what happens is the costume will do the fitting first, and then the hair and makeup will get to see them afterwards. So I'd be like sending on my fitting pictures and to her to say, well, it's kind of going this way, I think. And then, like, obviously, when Jan had seen them as well, then we have a discussion with John and the director and see if he agrees. And if like there was some things like with Belikov, for instance, it was like because he's such a handsome man and he sort of carries himself with such dignity, I kind of had to make his suits like not fit him very well, which he really wasn't very happy about because he made every suit I put on him, he just looked amazing in. And we didn't want Belikov to look too amazing because it didn't seem correct that he would be involved. He would give much thought to how he looked, should we say? And so yeah, John was. I think I did maybe 3 different fittings with Belikov to try and get him away from looking so amazing. Because he literally, like, whatever you put on him, he just looked great because he's just such a handsome, charismatic man.
You created a good segue to my next question because I wanted to talk about the prosthetics. But before we jump into that, it's funny how you're mentioning about trying to create those outfits for somebody like Belikov, where you're creating it like you wanted to make it a little bit sort of mismatched with the size, but then he just probably he just once he donned it, he just looked perfect, right?
Yeah, I mean that. I think the darker suit that he wore is actually like a 1950 suit, which is nuts. I mean, it's stupid, really, to put him in a 1950 suit. But I mean, it wasn't overtly 1950, should we say? But it just the way because it was a heavier material as well, which kind of helped because it sort of made him look a bit portlier than he actually is because he's really fit, kind of older gentleman, and it just sort of helped that he looked less fitted on him. It didn't feel right that his suit should fit him too correctly because it seemed to me his ideology was more like, I'm for the state and I'm trying to do, I'm a good man, absolutely, but he completely believes in communism as a concept, and that doesn't seem entirely compatible with making yourself look attractive at the same time. But someone might tell me that I'm wrong for thinking that, but at the time that seemed like the right way to go with him.
Just to sort of go back to talking about the collaboration with the hair and makeup design, because there is a very distinct use of prosthetics in the film, especially for somebody like Rob Maxwell and also Gorbachev. Does your design process get affected by the use of prosthetics? And then what is the design process like for when it comes to prosthetics? Because, for example, like when it comes to certain fabrics, are there certain fabrics you can't use because it might damage your prosthetics? And as well, you're saying about how fittings, usually it's costume that go first and then it's hair and makeup. Was it the other way around for something like this?
The other way around. It was all very, very, very rushed because, as I said previously, the whole thing was being done through full lockdown. So it's like we couldn't get in. I had to have like a special letter from the production company to like even get on the train to come from Glasgow to London because Mark Coulier, who was sort of doing the prosthetics with Jan, obviously because Jan's still involved with the process. It's not just Mark Coulier taking it on. So it's like the whole thing is a collaboration between Jan, the makeup and hair designer, Mark Coulier, the prosthetics designer, me, John, the director, and the producers sometimes as well. And so, yeah, we didn't really have enough fittings, to be fair, to that we, as many fittings as we'd normally have for something as complex as this. So what was happening was, and I think Roger was cast sort of quite late as well, because it sort of, I seem to remember he was meant to be cast and then it didn't happen. And then we were like, we really need him because we really need to start making for him, because it's a big whole process. And so he was cast quite late. So Mark, and obviously a lot of this there was a budgetary restrictions on this as well, because it's not the biggest budget. I mean, it's not the biggest budget film in the world. I mean, I don't know how it comes across as a film, but it wasn't a massive budgeted film. And so what happened was Mark had a body padding that he'd previously used on another film, which when we got Roger, so the first thing we did was I took Roger, well, me and Jan took Roger to Mark's workshop, and we tried this padding on him to see what it looked like on him. And then I can't remember where I tried to find the researcher. I think we'd looked at loads of pictures, obviously, and Mark had a load of pictures, I had a load of pictures, Jan had a load of pictures, and then we got together, with Roger, and we were sort of all discussing the different parts of his anatomy, as it were, and the sort of very specific body shape he had and how we could achieve it. And outside of that, Mark was obviously doing these. I think so. Mark does a scan. Mark did a scan of Roger, like a full body scan of Roger, and then I don't know how because obviously the prosthetic side of it is not really my thing, but in terms of the facial prosthetics anyway. So the facial prosthetics, I think it gets. I don't know if he does it on a 3D on a computer or how they does it now, because I know that he still does a lot of stuff by hand sculpting. But anyway, so he was doing that as a separate process. He was working obviously on Robert Maxwell's face, and I was mostly focused on his body shape more than his head, obviously. But so we did one fitting, and I think we put that on him, and I brought some suits that were quite big to see, how suits draped over the body padding that Mark already had, and just to get a gauge, because again, any sort of shortcuts you try and work with, because we didn't have a lot of time. And it's like, if I could put a jacket on him and go, oh well, that nearly fits him, bloody then that's quite good. It's helpful. But so we had that first fitting, and then we really just tried the body padding on him with a few bits of clothes to see what happened. And then we went away, and then I think the second fitting I couldn't be at because I was already up in Scotland prepping. So Elle, my assistant designer, had to do it, and I had to look at it on Zoom, which is virtually impossible to sort of get an idea of someone's size, because you can sort of abstractly say, oh, I think this person's about a 48-inch chest, say, right? But that doesn't really mean anything until you're standing next to that person and seeing how big they come across. Because Robert Maxwell was a big guy, do you know what I mean? He was tall as well as large. And so what we'd sort of guesstimated how big I thought his chest should be and how big we thought his waist should be. And then, like I said, Elle did this fitting without me, where I just looked at it on Zoom. And I think they started looking at some of the facial prosthetics as well. And then after that fitting, we took measurements from that padding to start making his actual suits, because we literally had to start making the suits and shirts, because otherwise there wouldn't have been enough time to make them. It's, because making a suit is not the shortest process either, let alone making a body padding with a suit to go over the top of it. So we'd sourced some sort of dead stock suiting for the lighter blue suit that he wears, and then with the brighter blue one, again, it was a tough decision, that suiting, because what I was trying to do, in the interim period, we'd done some screen tests with Alvin up here in Glasgow, where I'd sort of seen how much, particularly the grade in Russia, really kind of killed a lot of colours. And so there was a purple overcoat that we'd made for Henk, which was really nice in real life. But actually, when you put it on screen with the grade that Alvin was going to do, it just became grey. So it was entirely pointless. So that was one of the things that got cancelled sort of after we'd done that camera test. But so because I knew that it was killing a lot of the brighter colours, I decided that I'd need to use, instead of using like you would normally just kind of use a navy pinstripe, a classic navy pinstripe on a character like him. But if I did that, I knew it would just almost go black, because again, like his son Kevin Maxwell is wearing, sometimes in some of the shots, wearing like a navy pinstripe suit, and you can't even see the pinstripe in it just because the grade is so extreme. So we went with this brighter blue color, which I think works. Ideally, I would have liked it to have been slightly less bright, because it is a bit punchy, but I don't kind of mind it either, because he's a big extravagant character as well, so it kind of works. But yeah, it was, so we were looking at the different weights of material, like I was saying, Belikov, the heavier weight material, cloth of his suit sort of helped to make him seem heavier than he was. It's kind of like you can't use lighter weight suitings on someone who is large, because it just doesn't help. And it particularly doesn't help when you've got a fake body padding underneath it, because it just doesn't sit well. It doesn't help make them appear heavy, So we'd chosen both those fabrics, and Adrian at Academy Costumes has started making these suits based on the sizes that we'd taken off the bodysuit on the second fitting. And then so Ella had taken a load of photographs as well, so I was showing those photographs to John, and John was like, well, we have to get Roger up to Glasgow because I can't see it. I can't see how big he is, or da da da, which was entirely fair. But the reason that we weren't bringing Roger up to Glasgow was because of, you know, COVID restrictions and stuff mainly. But they managed to make it happen, and we got him up, and then, which was invaluable, to be honest. And I'm really glad that John said that at that point, because when he got up and we put the bodysuit onto him, we could kind of instantly see what all the problems were that we couldn't see when we weren't there, you know, because we couldn't physically be there. Which the main problems were that his chest, he's very barrely. When you look at real pictures of him, he's really barely. Like the top of his chest is unnaturally high. It's like most people, when they put quite a lot of weight on, they tend to put it on their stomach, and it sort of they become more sort of, they're thinner along their shoulders, and they just go out wider as their stomach sort of gets larger. But he has got this kind of like giant proud chest on him, which is something that we changed when he came up to be fitted in Glasgow. So we changed that, and also the back of his neck, that was looking a little bit walrus-like, which again, he wasn't, like Robert Maxwell wasn't. He wasn't kind of stooped in any way from his weight. He was very upright looking, and we took some more padding off of his shoulders as well, because he wasn't very wide at the top, but it was just this giant sort of proud chest and stomach. And then we added in, we added in a section as well around his stomach that was a bit softer padding than the rest of it, so that his trousers, where his trousers sit very high on his body, the trousers actually sort of sat into this groove that we'd almost made around the padding. So it went in and sort of grasped on like it would grasp onto your actual body if you were that large, you know, because obviously there's some give there, and with padding there's not necessarily so much give. So we sort of engineered that in there as well. And then he went away again, and then we'd started making the suits at that point. And then because of the changes that we'd made to his body padding, the suits didn't fit in the right way because they weren't hanging in the right way, because obviously the body shape had changed. So poor old Adrian, and I think it was just before Christmas. So during sort of the Christmas period, because he was starting work after Christmas, poor old Adrian had to sort of recut all these suits and his overcoat as well, actually, that he wears to Moscow, recut them all to fit this new body shape, which was a lot of work and in not much time. And you know, he really pulled it off. It's amazing really what they managed to do for us. And so so I think it was like four fittings overall that we had, which seems a lot, but it was just about enough. And I think, you know, I'm really proud of the way that he's ended up looking like. And it was really great. And all of those padding problems, we dealt with. Mark Coulier's team dealt with that. And obviously Jan was there as well when we were having all these discussions of like, well, no, you need to be more like this. And like I said, John was there on that fitting when we came to Glasgow, and he was like, no, it's not quite right there. And so it was a whole group effort to make that character. And what Mark Coulier did on his face was just incredible as well, and his hair and everything. He's quite an unnatural looking human being anyway, and to make Roger just become him was quite remarkable and scary, because I think I've said it before that we'd got him dressed and I hadn't seen him, and I walked into the fitting room and he was sort of there without his jacket on, and he just looked real. But then Roger would speak with his normal voice when he wasn't acting, and it'd be like, why is Roger's voice coming out of that strange man's face? It's really peculiar. And it was really happy with how he turned out. I think his body shape is really true to the body shape of Robert Maxwell as well. And he did do hand sections for him as well. So he had sort of like hand prosthetics as well to make his hands fatter. So yeah, I mean, a privilege to work with someone like Mark Coulier and Jan as well. I mean, I've known Jan for quite a long time anyway, but it was really lovely to work with both of them. They were both incredible people.
I think it's quite interesting to hear the sort of how much needs to go in for just one actor, and the fact is that they're having numerous fittings around what they're doing, and how many alterations need to be made on suits, and what kind of style that they'll need to wear. But then also, when you're saying about having a lighter suit in terms of weight for them would affect like how the design is. Also, it's just quite funny as well when you're saying about hearing the actor's voice whilst he's still in the prosthetic makeup, not Robert Maxwell's. It always sort of kind of it's quite jarring but funny as well to hear, and it's probably quite funny to see as well.
Yeah, no, it was really amazing when he first walked out for his screen test. Everybody was just like, "Oh my God, that's like nuts!" And I think it was, yeah, I think John had got sent a picture to Matthew Vaughan saying, here's Roger, and Matthew Vaughan showing it to somebody who knew Robert Maxwell, and they were just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that he just looks exactly like him. That's insane." So that's pretty. You can't get much better than that. Someone who knew the actual person saying that he looks exactly like him. That's pretty good, pretty good. And there was lots of little other funny quirks with him that were. I didn't. I mean, I'm not saying this is necessarily the truth, but every picture that I looked at of Robert Maxwell, he never wore a watch. So there's a lot of watch. I do a lot of watch work as well, and there's watches and suits. And so I was kind of like, oh, we don't need to get a watch for him. That's kind of weird, but fine. He didn't wear a watch. And then yeah, and also John really wanted him to wear braces, and he does wear braces in the film, and I think it was the right decision. But again, as far as I could see, Robert Maxwell never wore a pair of braces, which is surprising considering you'd imagine his trousers might fall down with that kind of body shape that he had. But yeah, he looks good in braces. It's a good 80s nod, obviously. And and also he's got that little monogram on his shirt as well. So again, when I was looking at the research, and I think probably when we were discussing his body shape and just trying to find as many pictures of him without a jacket on as possible, I noticed that he had this little monogram on his shirt. So we've got that on there as well. So that's quite nice. With just an RM in a little diamond shape embroidered on his, like a lot of sort of rich men would do in that period. Have that little monogram somewhere on their shirts, so that when they went to dry cleaning, they could tell which ones they were. Well, I'm sure they'd know which ones were Robert Maxwell's shirts because they're absolutely about 15 times bigger than everybody else's.
Yeah, exactly. And I do like the braces image, that sort of feel. It has that, if you think about it as well, it's like very iconic 80s image of that with the braces and the suit and that sort of Wall Street feel of it all.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I really liked because we really went to Braces Town with Kevin Maxwell because I had seen pictures of Kevin Maxwell with braces, and it was funny because Anthony got really attached to the braces because I don't know if he'd not worn braces before or something, but he was really into them, and like he even wanted to borrow. He went away. He went away for the weekend at some point. He's like, "Can I take some braces with me?" I was like, "Yeah, if you want to, but I don't know why I'm taking braces." But he was like, "I just really like them. They're really good." And but yeah, it was a nice touch. I like those little touches between father and son. If that Robert Maxwell's got the really nice braces with the with the button on braces, and Kevin's are just a little bit more rubbish. And well, not rubbish because it's entirely fine for them to be clip on in that period, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just not quite as elevated as having a button on brace. Button on brace is like proper money, and it's like a clip on brace is just like sort of the cheap alternative. And I sort of quite like that I put him in the clip braces rather than button braces. And also, that again, the sort of synergy between Robert wearing the pinstripe and his son wearing the pinstripe as well, and him trying to emulate his father. That's kind of nice stuff.
Yeah, and it feels like the sort of mini me trying to be
Yeah,
dad, and he can't, get out of his shadow, that sort of big shadow of his.
It's a big shadow.
Just
But
ahead.
Anthony was so phenomenal as that character as well. And also, talking of weird voices, it's like Anthony is from. I'm going to say the wrong one now. I think he's Northern Irish. Maybe he's Irish. He's going to hate me if I get the wrong one. He's Irish or Northern Irish, and I apologize, Anthony, for not knowing which one it is. But that's mainly because he didn't, throughout the entire filming, he didn't talk in his actual accent. He talked it the way that he talks in the film. And so when he started talking on the last day, I think that we shot with him, and he started talking in his normal accent, I was like, "What's going on?" And so all these actors, it's just mental. It's like I don't even know where he's from anymore. I still don't know where he's from.
You got it right. It is Northern Irish.
It is Northern. Okay, apologies. You're a proud Northern Irish man, Anthony, and I love you.
Just to sort of get to the penultimate question, what was your favorite costume to design?
I don't know if I talked enough about Taryn's costume. This is the thing, because I feel like I should talk more about Taryn's costume. But in truth, so before I actually talk about what my favorite costume is, I just want to say that other things about Taryn's costume that are kind of funny. So, like Taryn's watch, which again, nobody probably even sees his digital watch, but these are the levels of weird things that we think about or talk about or do. So Taryn's watch, because of this, so I was watching quite a lot of. I started watching some like period James Bond films just out of interest, just to see how they portrayed the KGB or the baddies, or even like what the uniforms look like, if they'd done the correct uniforms or they'd done incorrect uniforms for various reasons. And then I was kind of like getting really into all this watch research, like I was saying to you previously about like all the different watches that people wear. And then I was like researching all the different types of watches that James Bond had worn. And I know because I really wanted a digital watch, obviously because it's the 80s and he's coming from Japan, which is like the land of the digital watch. And then I came across this one that Roger Moore wears in Octopussy, which is like 1983. And so the one that Henk actually wears is the same watch that the James Bond wears in Octopussy. Just because I thought it was quite funny that again, nobody's going to know, but now they will know because I've said it. But I thought it was a funny detail that that Henk might kind of identify with that sort of slickness of Roger Moore and that sort of charming aspect of him, because Henk is a really charming character, as well as being very business minded, and as well as he's a very complicated character, Henk. Anyway, so that's the only thing sort of extra thing that I wanted to say about Henk, because I think I've talked about his suits and his boots and all the rest of it enough. But in truth, my favorite costume character that we were designing was Robert Stein, and it's really hard to say why. And most people are like, "Why do you like Robert Stein? That's so weird." I think it's mainly because he's one of the characters that we knew the least about in a way, and has had the least amount of research on. So I think I found two references of him, I think, which were from documentaries on YouTube or whatever. One of them, which is at the end of the film, actually, there's the part of that is the bit where I think he's in the back of a cab or something at the end of the film, when they sort of say Robert Stein, blah, 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 and just say, the bit at the end where they say what happened to the various people who were involved in the story. And he wasn't the most interesting guy to look at. And because, as I've already said, there's a lot of men in a lot of different types of suits in this film, I kind of wanted to lean into the fact that that he's a Hungarian. He's of Hungarian heritage, and then he moved to London, and then became guy who went out to Eastern Europe to try and find cheap games to license that, because they didn't realize the value of video games yet in Eastern Europe, and obviously because he was Hungarian, he could speak various languages, and he could just go and sort of, I wouldn't say con these people out of their software, but he could just say, "Oh, I've got contacts, I can get this made," and then they'd sell the rights to him for not very much, and he'd make a killing when he got back to in England, because the video game industry in that time was really like the Wild West, like the sort of, for a point of reference, just kind of like when the .com boom was going off, sort of more recently, it was like kind of anything goes, as it is in the film, sort of people fighting over sort of properties. That's I kind of liked. So I wanted to lean into the Hungarian angle a little, and the fact that he's an older guy, seemingly in a sort of in quite a young market almost, because the video game industry, or the video game, the people who were playing video games are obviously young people, but he's like this older guy. He probably doesn't even know how a computer works really, and I just had a lot of fun with the glasses and the funny little hat. And he just, again, it was just that it was a kind of a pleasure to create another man in a suit, but with his own little intricacies. So again, he's like a character who's really trying to appear bigger than he is, shall we say. So his suit was also made because Toby Jones is quite a small man, and it's quite difficult to find suits off the peg that fit him, especially period suits. So he made one of his suits as well, which is the suit that he wears most of the way through. But it's so we made a 3-piece suit for him, which is kind of based off a late 1970s kind of silhouette. So sort of backdating his clothes a bit as well, because he wouldn't have bothered to get a suit that was up to date for the 1980s or anything, because he just needs to look smart. So his trousers are a little bit more straight cut, and he's got 3-button fastening, I think, slightly larger lapel, and the waistcoat as well, which was nice because I don't think anybody else wore 3-piece nobody else wore a 3-piece in the end. And just to imbue his character with a slightly different feel, and those massive tweed overcoats that we got him, which were fantastic as well. And the one when he has the fight with Kevin Maxwell as well, with that funny little grey overcoat as well, that's just really tightly fitted on him. And it was really nice for me. And his tie and his shirts and his tie. So he's kind of got like 1970s ties that were quite pronounced, I suppose. Like they've got kind of paisley patterns on the stuff, and they're quite beautiful ties actually. But I feel like he wouldn't put his money in his suit, but he would buy a tie that's a bit more like, I'm a proud businessman. And his shirts have got the white collar and candy stripes, because again it's kind of like this kind of business orientated, and they're a bit more up to date, I suppose. They're a bit more 1980s, so it's kind of like he's an amalgam of different periods sort of smashed together on one person. And Toby was like really lovely. And when I finally fitted, because again the first fitting that we did with him, I couldn't be there because I had to be in Glasgow and I wasn't allowed to come back. And he's based in London. So again, Rosie, one of my other assistants, we'd pulled out a load of suits before I left, and she tried some suits on him. And then we got them measured, and then Angel's Costumes made his suits very beautifully. And so he was measured, and I'd chosen a material before I left as well. And then I had a sort of Zoom conversation with Toby and said, this is the material that we're thinking to make your suit out of, et cetera, et cetera. And, he was very kind in that, because you don't really ever want to be in a situation with an actor where you're kind of saying this is a fait accompli. And so, because that's not giving them any room to maneuver or to bring some of their own ideas, which might be fantastic, and you should always be open to them. But we were so tight on time that I was really kind of hoping that he'd kind of go along with what we'd planned, because it was just going to be really, really difficult to do anything other than that, because like I said, the whole reality of the pandemic, and even being able to source fabrics was, all the shops were shut. All the shops in Glasgow were shut. We couldn't buy anything in Glasgow at all. I had to phone fabric shop stores in London to get them to open up. Well, not even open up, really. It was really because they weren't allowed to be open, so they kind of had to let me in and then walk away a long way away. And obviously we were wearing face masks all the time. And then I'd have to sort of say, oh, this one and this one and this one, and then we'd get them sent on later. But I think it was actually illegal. I don't think they're actually supposed to be signed, so I won't say which fabric shops. But thank you, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to make the film. And yeah, but so fortunately, Toby was really open about everything. He was kind of like, "Oh, I'll do what I do, you do what you do," sort of thing. And then when we had the final fitting with him when he came up to Glasgow, he was just kind of like, "Well, you know, I don't really, I don't really need to do any acting now, do I?" Which I don't know if that's a diss or if that's a compliment, but he did do lots of acting, thankfully, and some of my favorite acting in the film, like when him and Kevin Maxwell are having that sort of powwow in his office, and Kevin just knocks the thing off his desk as he walks out. That's like the funniest thing I've ever seen. And and Robert Stein just eating his Chinese noodles or whatever. But yeah, it was great, and I loved what Toby did with it, and I loved what we did with it. And it was, yeah, I was really happy with that costume. I was really happy with lots of other costumes as well, but I have an affinity with Robert Stein. I don't know why.
I think Robert Stein is a very left field choice. But I think you're right. If you think about it, is that I think what you don't realize is when you read more up about him, is that he's probably the secret alpha male out of all of them in
Yeah,
terms of he's the one going out there to do the deals. He may have Microsoft behind him as like a financial backing, for example, but he's the guy who's there finding, he's the guy on the floor finding
yeah,
out what's perfect, what's good, what he should get. And the fact is that he has the fight with the Maxwells where you kind of see his full power in full flow there, and that's actually like you see him come alive and
yeah.
whatnot.
I
And
mean, yeah, I suppose that's what I was meaning to say about with his shirts and ties and stuff. Like he's trying to punch up to where Robert Maxwell is, but so he's trying to sort of visually show that he's worthy, if you like, rather than being too shrew-like. Because I don't think he is. Well, definitely not the way Toby's portrayed him. Anyway, he's not shrew-like, as you say. He's like he is powerful and he's clever as well. He's found this whole market and how to exploit it essentially. And for a guy an older guy as well, who, like I said, doesn't probably have much interest in computing whatsoever, it's he's he's a force.
yeah, exactly. Crazy to think. Just to wrap up this episode, I do have one last question. What would you say was an important video game that shaped your life when you were growing up?
There's a lot. There's a lot, but a lot of ones that are not so recent, should we say? Because I think I've said it before as well. I bought all these video consoles as they came out, like as a teenager slash younger person. But yeah, so I had them all. Like we started with well, actually, even before consoles, like we had ZX Spectrums, and we sort of started doing coding and that. Me and my brother, but that didn't really ever pursue that much further because it's like really hard work coding. So yeah, when all the consoles started coming out, we had like a Mega Drive, then we had a SNES. I had them all, man. I had like an Atari Lynx, a Game Gear, a Game Boy. What else? All of them. All of them. I had most of the sort of earlier consoles I had at some point. But yeah, in terms of games, like Super Mario World 2, I think that was the right one, wasn't it? On SNES. I think it's Super Mario 2 is on SNES. I think that played that a lot. And then obviously original Mario Kart. And even to this day, me and my kids, we play Mario Kart a lot. I think Mario Kart might be as as Hank says in the film, the perfect game. Mario Kart is my perfect game, I think. But Street Fighter 2 as well. Loved Street Fighter 2. Spent a whole lot of time on Street Fighter 2. And then Tekken, and then moving into when like PlayStations came out and that, then Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was like pretty major as well, because like I used to skateboard when I was younger and stuff, so it made me long for my younger days. But yeah, there's so many amazing games. I love all of those ones. Yeah, not so much when you get into like now with like when it all started going like Halo and stuff. Even GoldenEye was quite good on SNES as well. But when it all started getting a bit too immersive, I was like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time, especially now with like two children and a career and a wife and everything else. It's like I don't have time to be saying I'm going to go to this nether world and destroy some zombies or something for 5 hours. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, we just got back to Mario Kart because it's a winner.
Solid choice. Solid choice. I'm going to mess up your name, and I'm not going to do it deliberately. I've been thinking about this the whole time. Nat, thank you
Yeah.
very much for joining me. Thank you for spending your time to talk about Tetris, which is now streaming on Apple TV Plus. Encourage everybody to see it. Thank you again for your time.
Watch it. It's great. Everybody says so.
And everybody can't be wrong, right?
Exactly. I never argue with everybody.
Thank you again. Thank you again. Take care and bye bye.
Right. Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.